Today I'm talking to the wonderful author and former children's laureate, Malorie Blackman. Malorie, hello.
Hi.
Right, Malorie, we're going to talk about writing, how to write, why we write, and we're talking to teachers. So let's just begin with a very general question. What's it like being a writer?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because part of the reason I love my job is because the days aren't the same. And even when I'm sitting in my attic and writing, I'm on a new part of my story and I'm exploring that and so on. So most of my days are in my attic, at my computer, writing away. And if you just do a page a day, in a year, you'll have 365 pages. So it is this thing of you just have to sit down and get on with it and have the discipline to do that. And I think actually when I was a teenager, I used to keep a diary and I kept it every day. That was a really useful and good way of actually getting into that habit of writing something every day. And for me, it was also really useful for not being afraid to express my true thoughts and feelings on things, even though they were secret diaries. So as a teenager, I certainly wasn't going to show anybody.
And did you stick to it? Was it the truth?
Yeah, it absolutely was. Because it was around the time that my parents split up. And so I had an awful lot of angst and anger. And so keeping a diary was my way of handling that, of coping with that.
And when you're away from the writing, so I'm imagining you sitting there for an hour, applying yourself for an hour and writing. When you're away from that, let's imagine you're in the middle of a story, middle of a big book. Are you thinking about the story? Are you saying, well, I could go in that direction. I could bring in a new character. Is that what you're doing when obviously you're doing all sorts of other things like eating and washing and goodness knows what. But do you do some daydreaming and
yeah. But it is definitely about daydreaming and talking to those characters and listening to them in my head. And I would say the majority of my writing goes on when I'm kind of just in my own head and in my own world. And I remember when I was at school, and I'd always be getting told off for daydreaming and, Malorie, could you stop looking out the window and daydreaming, please? And now I think, yeah, actually that's part of my job now, so it's kind of, and I love kind of having conversations with my characters and really getting to know them so that by the time I sit down to write, they're like real people. They're not me. They're real people in my head, and I'm kind of just writing how they would act in certain situations and what they think about things and how they speak. And so I don't really tend to start a story until I feel I really know my major characters.
Okay, so let's choose a book. We've got some of your books here. Let's read out some titles. So we've got Pig Heart Boy. We've got Cloud Busting. Got
Operation Gadget Man.
That's from a while ago. There's one that's out of print there, but I brought it along anyway.
Yeah, Not So Stupid's out of print. That was actually my very first book that I had published.
And of course we've got the famous Noughts Crosses.
Yeah, that was my 50th book.
50th?
Yeah, 50th.
Is that your bestseller?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so pick one of these books, and what I want to do is find out how you got into it, and then what happened if you got stuck, and what did you do? So we really get to close grips. We get close grips with the sort of writing process, if you like. So which one are you going to choose? Anyone you like.
Shall we pick up Boy?
Very good. So look, there's Malorie. You've written however many books before you get to this one, right? Then just see if you can go back to the beginning where a little spark happened in your head and you thought, oh, that might make a good story. Actually, how did that happen?
Well, the spark was actually from outside rather than just in my head, because this book came about because I read a newspaper article. And it was written by a doctor who said that we'd have to start using animal organs because there's such a shortage of human donors. And he reckoned that we could use pigs because they're domestic animals, they're not endangered. And there was actually a place where they had started breeding these genetically modified pigs, ready to put their organs into people, but they couldn't get a government license to do it. And I thought, what a really interesting, brilliant idea for a book.
Why? Why did you think it was interesting?
I think it was this thing of what makes us us? What makes us human? What makes us who we are? If I needed a kidney or a heart transplant or whatever, I would hope I'd be able to get one. But the idea of having it from an animal, it was really interesting discussing that with some people, because opinions seemed to be very firmly split down the middle between those who didn't like the idea and those who thought, well, like me, I'd rather do that than die. I mean, when it comes right down to it. So I thought, actually, the idea of a boy, Cameron, facing his own mortality, because he knows he probably won't see his next birthday unless he gets a heart transplant, and then And then his dad writing to the doctor, and the doctor saying, please help my son. And the doctor says, yes, we can. You have to keep it quiet, though. And Cameron thinks as soon as he has his heart, things will go back to normal and his life will carry on. I mean, at the moment, when the story starts, he can't even get up the stairs without being sort of out of puff. And he thinks his life will go back to normal as soon as he's had this heart transplant. He tells his best friend, and his best friend is so worried, he tells his dad. And Marlon's dad, his best friend's dad, sells the story to the newspapers. And of course, then all hell breaks loose. And poor Cameron now has the press on his doorstep. And some of his friends won't even speak to him. They're afraid to be near him because they think they might catch something and so on. And I did quite a lot of research for this to try and make sure I got it right. I got the tone right. I got books on operations and heart transplant operations and so forth to get the science of it right. So for me, it was kind of a really sort of interesting book to write because it taught me a lot about sort of xenotransplantation, which is what it's called when you put the heart of another species into, or one species into another. And the whole thing of the prejudice behind it, where some people were actually saying, oh, but, you know, you might catch something, or you don't know what diseases pigs have that might suddenly find themselves in humans, and sort of, you know, the whole thing about bird flu, etc., jumping into to humans. So I just thought that really sounded to me like lots of material for a book.
So let's go to this moment. So there you are, you're reading the newspaper Sunday morning or whenever, and then you suddenly see it. So what was that moment when you saw the story? Was it instant? Did you go, ooh, story?
It kind of was, because I was reading through this article, absolutely fascinated. And I was sort of reading it, and as I sort of read through it and the science behind it and sort of people's objections to it and the pros and the cons of it and so forth, and I thought, wow, that's so interesting. And the whole thing had so much kind of conflict behind it between those who liked the idea and those who didn't. And by the time I'd finished the article, I thought, I've got to write about this.
So you got a story, but the way newspaper stories, of course, it's all he, and in some ways it's quite often not very personal. We've got a time frame, that's the present. Of course, you could have heart transplants from animals in the future on Mars, you could have it anywhere, but the newspaper has given you a time frame in the now, if that's what you want to go with. Yeah. But you've got to choose who. So we got a when, and we got a what, and the problem, okay, if that's where stories start, as they often do, with a problem. And you've got in that story all the comings and goings, and conflict was the word you used, right? So how do you now decide it'll be a boy called Cameron?
That's a really interesting question. It's one of these things I think, well, who can inhabit this story? Who's best to inhabit this story? And I just thought, I really want it to be a boy, because who's kind of feels that almost he's got to kind of hide his emotions or try and protect his mum in some way and be brave and about what he's got when he's absolutely terrified. And his family are don't really want to speak about the fact what will happen if he doesn't get the heart transplant, but he knows. And this whole thing of kind of not talking to children who might have something wrong with them, and how we try and protect them, but they know anyway. And they're trying to protect him, but they're almost being too protective, because the more they protect him, the worse he feels about all the things he can't do. And then I wanted it to have again, he's sort of fighting against his family, and his nan is the only one who treats him like a sort of normal boy, and his parents are being really protective, but they're desperate to find a solution to this. And for them, it's got to be a solution. There's got to be a solution. If we just push hard enough, we can find one. Where he's not, Cameron himself isn't really convinced about that. And then I wanted it to be sort of a wider picture of how society in general treat him, and how the press latch onto the story and they kind of make his life a misery. So I wanted to have conflict on a number of levels.
Open it out.
Exactly. So it's about him in a sort of conflict for Cameron, about how he feels about having a pig's heart put inside of him in the first place, and then his family, conflict with his family, and then conflict with the press and the wider world. And then I kind of thought, actually, if it starts with him, something's happening to him, and then I thought, if he's drowning, they say when you're drowning, your whole life flashes before you. And so I could have him drowning. And do you want me to sort of tell you a bit about the beginning?
Well, if this is where you started.
Yeah, it is. Well, it starts, I'm drowning in this roaring silence. I'm drowning. I'm going to die. I look up through the grey-white shimmer of the swimming pool water. High above, I can see where the quality of the light changes. The surface. But it is meters above me. It might as well be kilometres. My lungs are burning and my blood is roaring and my whole body is screaming out for air. If I don't take a breath, I'll burst. If I do take a breath, I'll drown. Some choice, no choice. So once I had the beginning and I thought, okay, if I start it like that, then I can tell the rest. So we're starting on that moment of change or conflict for my character, something's actually happening. And then I can go into how we got up to that point through the rest of the story. So I always try and find an immediate way into my stories.
Why? Why is that?
Because I want to grab my reader. I want them to kind of pick it up, and then when they read the first page, I can't put it down again. So I always try and kind of grab them from the very first page, and I want them to be invested in my characters and care about my characters and what's going to happen to them. So I do try and start on that moment of change or conflict for my major character.
And is a key way to do that for you to get inside that person's head. So you're outside, and so you take us inside the person's head.
In most of my stories, you're just seeing the story through the eyes of my main character. In Noughts Crosses, you're seeing it through two characters' eyes,
Yes.
Seffi and Callum. And again,
Which was very clever, we have to say. We'll digress just for a moment. The stunning thing with Noughts Crosses is the fact that we're following a story through two people's eyes with a completely different perspective on it, which of course matches the colour conflict that you've got going on in the book.
Well, what they say, there's, at the risk of sounding a bit arty-farty, wasn't it Nietzsche who said that there is no truth, only perspectives? But I always thought, well, if we had, the more perspectives we have, maybe that gets us closer to the truth. And I definitely wanted to have the same world, but viewed through, as you said, by two people who are in completely different places. Seffi's very privileged and has money, and her family have money and so forth. So she's not quite, at the beginning of the story certainly, she's not really aware of what's going on in society as far as the Noughts are concerned, whereas Callum is a Nought and facing discrimination, and it's all about how kind of seeing the world through his eyes and her eyes and doing the chapters sort of alternately. So you sometimes get two different perspectives on the same thing.
Events,
yeah, exactly.
But with Pick Up Boy, you went for the intensity of a single vision.
Exactly, yes, yeah.
Okay, so let me take you now. Let's say you've been writing along and you hit the wall.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting you always hit the wall, or even sometimes.
It has happened,
exactly.
though, yeah.
But let's say just getting stuck.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does it feel like to be you stuck at a moment in the story? If you can think of a time when you were writing that one, or if you can't think in that book, maybe another book, what do? You got stuck. It's not working out. How do you de-stick? That's
a very good question. Sometimes you just have to kind of keep going and grit your teeth and just keep writing, even if most of it's going to be discarded. And sometimes I find the best thing for me to do is just do something else. Go away from it, do something else for a day or two. And what I try and do, if I'm really stuck, and it's just not coming, then maybe I'll go and draw something or play on the piano or do something creative. So that if I'm not thinking about it, or just have a good night's sleep sometimes is enough, and just having a good night's sleep is enough, where then the next morning I think, oh, that's how I can solve that problem. There's no one way of doing this. I think for me, I found doing another creative activity, having a good night's sleep, maybe sometimes even putting it to one side and doing something else. Starting, if I'm doing a story here, for example, and it's not working, go and write some poetry. Go and, to do something else, maybe write some music, try and compose some music, and then come back to it. That might help. So I found there's no hard and fast rule. There's no one way of doing that. If I want my character to go this way, and they are telling me, no, I want to go that way.
That's spooky.
And I'm trying, well, it sounds very bizarre, but seriously, because my characters are so real to me, it's almost like they're saying, this is what, and then this happened, and this is what I thought, and I'm just basically trying to write it down as fast as I can. And if I sort of think, no, I think you should do this, and they say, no, I want to do that, and I'm trying to force them that way, that's usually when I get stuck.
Any of us who write, but children as well, there is no ending. I've done an adventure. I've had a problem at the beginning, and then we've got out of it, and we've been on an adventure. And what do? Come home and have tea?
Yeah.
So tell us about endings.
Well, if this is a person's life, the story's going to be this bit. And that's how I see it. I'm not trying to tell their entire story. I'm trying to tell you a little bit of their story. So it might be this bit, or it might be this bit, or it might be that bit, but I'm not trying to tell the whole thing. Because when you shut the book, I want you to still carry on thinking about my characters and what happens to them next, and what will they do after this, and where will they go, and how has this changed their lives, and so on. So I think I wouldn't want to write their whole story and then at the end everything is tied up in a neat little bow. Again, it depends on the age range of the story and what kind of story you're telling. But certainly for teens and upper juniors, I try and make sure the main problem is resolved. But I do try and have maybe the odd strand where you think, oh, I wonder what's going to happen with that in the future, kind of thing. But I think it's. I've read books where they kind of ended, and you thought, yeah, but come on, you can't just leave it like that. What's going to happen next? Yeah. And it's really unsatisfying. So I don't try and do it. I did that with Knife Edge, the second one in the Noughts Crosses series, where it does end on a cliffhanger, and you had to read the sort of third book to see what happens. But I think that's the only one where I deliberately ended it on that cliffhanger and it didn't have a proper ending.
And has the main character or characters in Noughts and Crosses, have they learnt something? Has Pickup Boy, has he learnt anything?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think especially with Cameron in Pickup Boy, it's about, as I said, it's about him facing his own mortality. But then something happens that means that he has to face it with somebody else close to him. Which we won't say now. Yeah. But also it's about him appreciating the life he has and appreciating, that we should make the most of our family and our friends while we have them. And it's about him appreciating his life and not taking that for granted. And
if he does that... Your hope is the reader does the same?
I hope so, yeah.
So the reader goes with Cameron because they've, as it were, just to use a crude expression, bought into Cameron at the beginning with that sensational opening, that they go, this is somebody I want to care, this is something I care about, he's vulnerable, he's someone I want to care for and care about. And then there are these dilemmas and problems at personal level, family level, social level. Yeah. He learns something, and you're taking the reader on a journey where you hope that the reader goes, all right,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, with even with
sort of like a ticking clock in a way, as it goes along, that you're sort of absorbing something of it.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I would definitely hope so. I mean, I tried to do the same thing with Cloudbusting, where it's the friendship of these two boys who were kind of polar opposites at the beginning, but how they learn from each other. And how and this one was kind of inspired because my daughter came home one day and said, oh, some of my friends are into fashion and blah 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 blah, and I'm not, and should I just pretend that I am? And I said, no, you shouldn't. You should be yourself. And so it's dedicated to my daughter, and I've said dare to be different. And for me, the whole thing was about daring to be different. Be yourself. And if you don't like the same thing as your friends, if you're into different things, don't hide that. And so for me, it was very much a statement about seeing the world in a different way. And again, at the end of that story, it's about his life has changed because now he sees the world in a way he'd never seen it before. And for me, and that again, that thing of if people say to you, oh, don't want to be friends with that person, God, they're a bit weird or whatever, embrace them, and because they're going to have a different way of looking at the world, and then that will inform your thinking, and it will just open your horizons. And I think for me, it was about just saying, if you are different, don't embrace that. Don't be afraid of that. And if somebody is different to you, why would you be scared of that? That's something to be celebrated, not scared of. And so for me, Cloudbusting was all about celebrating our differences.
So these books, the ones I've read and the ones you're telling me about, most of them seem to be about a kind of awareness. I'm sort of thinking this through, but also the way you've described yourself going about and listening, and I follow some of the things that you read and you write on social media and so on, that awareness is crucial in the writing process, in the thinking, the pre-writing process, in the writing, and then to finish off books. Well, Malorie Blackman, thank you ever so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Hey, if you like this channel, please subscribe, press like, and tell your friends.